Hello, and welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable thoughts before breakfast, which means 6 thoughts about reading, writing, or other story-related things. Well, I'm having to record in a different room in the house this morning, and it's a little closer to the street, so you may hear some sounds of traffic. Hopefully, if so, it's not too distracting, but we'll just have to see how it goes. So anyway, I've got my 6 things all ready, and let's get started. Number 1, I believe I mentioned last week that I was getting ready to start work on Firmament Book 9, which is called Intoxication, and I did a little bit of outlining last week and then actually started the writing this week, and my goal is to write 1,300 words a day. And I have been able to surpass it so far, and as of yesterday, had 4,500 words down. So I feel like that's definitely a good start. And I am excited about this book, but I did realize, as I think I've mentioned, how little I really actually had planned for it. So I am having to continue, even though I already have the outline, just continue to flesh out the idea to really make it into a full-fledged plot. But I do think it's going well. It's always a little rough getting started, but I have been able to have some fun with it so far. I do feel like this part's going to have to be rewritten, but it's about getting the momentum going and getting it out on paper. So excited to begin work on that. Number 2, when it comes to Humanoid, which is book 8, I have to think there for a second. I started reading it out loud to my husband so he can help me out with some of the revision and just what needs to be fixed on it. And I did realize, speaking of writing openings, that I think the opening in Humanoid is one of the first openings I've written that I've pretty much been happy with it as it is. Like most, if not all, of the Firmament books and a lot of my other books, I've had to completely go back in revisions and redo the opening completely, like just make it something entirely different, because it's just hard for me to get going. I tend to drag and tend to be too heavy on the exposition and things like that, partly because the backstory in my series can be kind of complicated with all the relationships and who this person is and where they came from and what happened before, and etc., etc. I kind of set myself up for difficulty on that front. But so I usually end up dumping a lot at the beginning, being slow to get going, and then having to go back later and kind of trim it and give it a lot more polish and jump in so that it's not such slow going at the beginning. But all that to say, I really liked the opening that I wrote for Humanoid, and I actually think it's pretty much good to go. So I may share it on my blog sometime soon, just to start getting y'all excited for it. And number 3, when it comes to Eleftheria, which is the current Firmament book, book 7, it will be wrapping up on Kindle Vella next week. So there are 3 episodes left to release. 1 will be releasing tomorrow, and then the last 2 will be released next week. So once you have a story on Kindle Vella, you have to wait. All of the content has to have been on Vella for at least 30 days before you can publish it in any other form. So I am planning to publish in paper book and regular ebook in the middle of October. I believe that the tentative release date is October 12th. So that's when I'll finally be able to get a copy to hold in my hands and to share with others. And if you've been waiting for that, that's hopefully, Lord willing, when you can expect to have those versions. But Vella has been a great experience, and currently I am planning, if possible, to get Humanoid out on Vella, and I am going to try to do that this year. So lots of exciting stuff going on. Number 4, as you know, I'm always looking for good children's books, books that I can really feel comfortable, obviously, but also enjoy reading to my kids. So just we have a few series that we go for, like Amelia Bedelia, the Berenstain Bears, Dr. Seuss, things like that. And then I'll kind of like just browse the shelves while they're playing and just skim over some of the books, see what we can find. So last week we found this book called Once Upon a Time, The End. And it's about a father who's reading stories to a child and trying to get the child to go to sleep. And so the stories are, super short because he really wants the kid to sleep. And I thought the book was hilarious. But what I did find, so most of them are versions of existing stories, fairy tales and things like that. And the ones that the girls really enjoyed and thought were really funny were the stories they already knew. So like Three Little Pigs or like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, because they love those stories and they know them really well. But then this version, it's like, I think the Goldie ones was something along the lines of, there was this girl and she went in the house in the woods and some bears lived there and she ate some porridge and she sat in a chair and she laid in the bed. Then the bears came home and then she screamed and then they screamed and then she left. The end. Like it'll be just like the shortest version possible. And all the stories were like that. And it was really fascinating that, they enjoyed the whole book, I think, but when it came to the ones where they knew the actual story, they could see what the humor was in it. They could recognize the difference between what I'm reading in this book and what the actual version of the story is, and they thought that was funny. Like they understood what the point of it was, and that was just such a delight to see. So we enjoyed that book. The one caveat I have about recommending it is that one of the stories in it is a version of David and Goliath. It's just kind of dumb because, obviously there's no mention of God or anything. It's just like, oh, there's a small boy and he hit a giant with a rock and the giant fell down and died and whatever. And I didn't find it like super offensive or anything, but I wasn't really thrilled about it because, that story is really important. And I didn't really want it to be just like a silly thing for my girls. So kind of skipped over that one. But the rest of the stories were really fun and it was just enjoyable for everybody because then, my husband and I also both thought it was funny and fun to read. Number 5 on my currently reading, I know I've mentioned that I'm listening on audiobook to the Mary Russell and Sherlock Holmes story series by Laurie R. King. And I don't even know what number book I'm on. It's like 11 or something, I think. The book I'm listening to currently is called Pirate King, or it may be The Pirate King, but anyway, it is just not my favorite. In fact, it's probably my least favorite in the series so far, because for one thing, I'm just not finding the story that interesting. It's kind of a weird detour, I guess. Like they've already been all over the world and done all kinds of crazy things, but this just seems like a bit much to me. Like it's not, well, I say it's not about real pirates, but it kind of is, because basically Mary Russell is having to do this investigation related to a film crew, which of course it's, silent films very early on, because it's like the very early 1900s. Maybe in the 1920s, I think, is when this is set. Anyway, so she's on, having to infiltrate this film crew that's filming like this really convoluted sort of version of Pirates of Penzance to investigate some crimes that may be happening, but it's just a little far-fetched and a little bit contrived in my opinion. And also, so she does always spend quite a bit of each book on her own and separate from Holmes. But this one so far, like, I think I'm like almost 70% done with it, and he's barely been in it at all. And it's like, I like her as a character. I like Laurie R. King's writing, but really the reason I fell in love with this series is the way that Holmes is portrayed and the relationship between Holmes and Russell. So it's just kind of like, like, I would not really just pick this up and read it if I were not reading through the series specifically. However, I don't really mind that much because of the way I'm reading it. So for one thing, I'm not sitting down and reading it. I'm doing an audiobook, which means I don't have to like take specific time out of my day to sit down and open the pages and read it and like lose time from doing something else, because I can just listen while I'm doing other things. And so I don't feel that I'm wasting time on it. And like I said, the writing is good. Like her writing is good. And so it's not, like miserable to listen to. It's just kind of like, eh. And then also normally the time I do listen to it is while I'm falling asleep. So like I've probably listened to this book like 5 to 15 minutes at a time over the past several weeks. And I just listen while I'm falling asleep. I have the sleep timer on and then I pick it up again the next day. And so it's taken me a really long time, but I'm getting through the book. And honestly, it helps me fall asleep because it distracts me from, if I've gotten kind of wired before bed or, have other thoughts going on or something, it's helpful. So even though it's not the greatest book of all time, I'm still enjoying it to a certain extent and don't mind listening through it. Number 6, there's this event going on right now, an online event by Pro Writing Aid called the Science Fiction Writers Week. And I believe it's Monday through Friday this current week that we're in. And I just saw about it, I believe on a Facebook ad or something. And, it's just a free event with lots of interesting lectures, and there's author interviews, and there's networking events and stuff too, although I'm not really participating in that. But I just went ahead and signed up. And they have events going on all day live, and that I can't do because I don't have that much time to devote to listening to things. I can't really listen to stuff while my girls are up. And so I'm just kind of picking a few highlights each day to go back and listen to. And it's been really nice. There's been a lot of it is specific to science fiction, but a lot of it is also just good general writing principles. And it's always good to be refreshed on those and maybe to hear like a little bit different perspective on something, even if it's something I already know or have known for a long time. And it also just gets me really excited about story and the craft of storytelling and all of that, which is good timing for that because obviously I'm working on a bunch of projects right now. So I listened to a message last night where the lady was talking a lot about the point of your story, which she was saying point, and I basically would consider it, like the message of your story. And she was contrasting theme with the point or the message, and in a way that I thought was helpful and interesting. And it's always good to be really intentional about these things, because for one thing, like as she was pointing out, obviously you're not wanting to be preachy or hit readers over the head with the point of the story, but the way that you avoid that is by, the answer is not to have no point. The answer is that the story needs to flow naturally and organically from your point so that it's all, a cohesive whole rather than like a message that's just sort of nailed onto the top. So it helps to be really aware of what your theme and your message are so that you can make sure that it is all very integrated and all, that it's all part of each other. And so I did some thinking about some of my books that I'm working on now and thought I'd kind of use humanoid as an example of the difference between theme and message. So theme is going to be something that's very broad and just kind of a very general topic. And then the message is going to pinpoint more the area of that theme that you are specifically trying to drive home with your story, and basically the idea, the specific idea that you're wanting the reader to take away from what they've read. And so in humanoid, I would say the theme is humanity, which is just about as broad as it can get. And by that I just mean, true humanity, like what is it to be human? What is that? What does that mean? And so I would say the theme is humanity. And the point, if I had to sum it up, is that being made in the image of God is greater than being made in the image of a human. And so I'm exploring specifically the area of the theme of humanity that relates to contrasting humanity versus non-humanity. And I'm not going to get too much into detail about how I do that because I don't want to give spoilers. But basically, Andy's exploration of that theme makes up the core of the book, and her conclusions mark the finale. So the way that you drive home your message is not by saying it overtly or by, putting in the narration a sermon about it or anything like that. It is by having your character experience things relating to it and then come to a change over the course of the book. So one thing the lady said in the message that I was watching last night that I really thought was a good point, or a good way of looking at it, is that at the beginning your character has a misbelief or a misconception relating to the theme and the message, and the events of the story change the protagonist's viewpoint until by the end they have come to the conclusion that is your message. And that is what will make it stick in the mind and the heart of the reader, is that they go along that journey with the protagonist so that they're not preached at, but they get to actually experience it. Like they get to see and experience the events that are changing the main character's mind. And so they get to actually be a part of that progress and that evolution. So I would say at the beginning of this one, Andy does have some confusion about, and again, I don't think she would say that or even realize that, but there is a certain level in her of not knowing, I'm trying to think how to explain it without giving spoilers, but just of what it means to be human and what it means to not be human and how those two correspond.